Interview and job search strategies that work. I'm here with Scott Haddix. Hey, Scott, so tell us about yourself. How did you get started in your current role?
Well, it's kind of been an evolution of things, being in the right place at the right time. So I went in the military right out of high school. Matter of fact, I wasn't even 18 yet. Yeah, and that's interesting because I've worked in Africa quite a bit, and they talk about child soldiers, and I haven't one soldier in Africa that wasn't allowed to, or that was allowed to enlist before he was 18. And there I was in boot camp at 17. So I went to Navy boot camp at age 17, and it was very, very. It was life changing. Let's just say that. You've got people yelling and screaming at you to do things, and you get used to it in a demented sort of way. Yeah, I went to Navy Nuclear Power School and ended up flunking out of that. And when I was asked by then Senior Chief, now retired Master Chief Sprinkle, if I wanted to try out for the for BUDS for the Navy SEALs, I had flunked out of nuke school, so my confidence was really low. So I told him no. And that's probably one of the biggest regrets of my military career was that I didn't give that a chance. But we joke that Navy stood for never again volunteer yourself. But I volunteered for everything when I was in the Navy. I ended up being on a weapons handling ship, and I volunteered for the nuclear weapons handling team, and I got to go to some really nice training with that. They did a lot of counterterrorism training with the nuclear weapons handling team. So I got good experience with that. Ended up in the Persian Gulf on a minesweeper of all things, and I was an electrician, so I was going to be in the engine room. Well, it's 120 degrees over there. They said we need guys to volunteer for mine watch up on the forecastle on the pointy part up front, and you get an M14 and M60. Pair of binoculars and commo gear. They said, but you have to be an expert shot. So we only want to talk to guys who've been expert shots. Well, fortunately for me, I grew up around guns, so I had an expert qualification. So I ended up on the pointy part of the ship instead of down in the engine room. And I'd say that was a blessing. But yeah, I could spend my birthday out there. And then the Vincennes shot down the Iranian Airbus, and things got real crazy. People got shot at. We got shot at. They shot a Chinese silk missile at us. Just missed us, as a matter of fact. But that was, over 30 years ago. Then I got off active duty. And started working in security, and one of the security secretaries, her husband was a police officer locally there in Ann Arbor area. Actually, it was Pittsfield Township, and she said they're hiring for reserve officers. She said, "I think you'd be great at that." So I went down and I applied. They took 3 of us, and I was one of the 3. So I went to the Reserve Police Academy. Came back, started working for another security company. They had a lot of former law enforcement or guys that were moonlighting it that were currently in law enforcement. And there was a little township just north of Detroit called Royal Township. It still exists, but they don't have their own police department anymore. They used to have their own police department. And the head of the narcotics area, there's a sergeant. He said, I'll leave his name out, but he said he worked for the same security company that I did. He said, do you want to go kick down crack house doors in Detroit? I was like, you got to be kidding me. He says, no. He says, we're just north of 8 Mile, so all the drugs that are coming into all the Section 8 housing are coming from Detroit. So as long as we have a Detroit officer with us, we can go kick doors. He said, but I don't have enough people because it's a small department. So next thing you know, I went from a reserve officer to kicking down crack house doors in Detroit. I'm like, what the is going on? So, I mean, yeah, you could say, did I get paid for it? No, I didn't. But it was an experience that you can't put a price tag on. You know, he said, "Are you a sworn officer?" I said, "Yes, I am," and I was. So I got to go kick doors in Detroit, crack houses, and that was a learning experience all in itself. Years later, I moved to Indiana, got married, and was a drill instructor at the juvenile boot camp there, and took care of struggling kids, at-risk youths, as they call it. And so then they said, they've got an opening on the hostage negotiation team. Do you want to try out for that? And I was like, sure. So I went and applied, and they accepted me, and I went to the hostage negotiation school, and that was great. I mean, that was extremely interesting, to say the least. Then they said, we have a SWAT team. It's called CERT, Special Emergency Response Team. Would you be interested in being on that? I said, yeah, sure. What the heck? So I applied for that, tried out for it, was accepted, went to the 2-week SWAT Academy. Holy cow. That was a lot of training. It was very interesting, to say the least. And I did that for a couple of years. All the while I was still in the reserves, Naval Reserves. I made it into, I volunteered and made it into the Mobile Inshore Undersea Warfare Unit. And that was probably the next best thing for me to being, I don't know, I guess, being infantry or being in the Marines or the Army. And we did a lot of crazy stuff. A lot of fun stuff. We did counter-narcotic stuff down in the Caribbean. And so switching back and forth, you know, I got a civilian job where I'm a drill instructor at a juvenile boot camp, and I ended up being the assault team leader on the SWAT team, on the CERT team, and doing stuff with the Mobile Inshore Undersea Warfare Unit. It was actually based out of Toledo, Ohio, but they were never there. I mean, we traveled all over. I mean, we were up and down the East Coast, everywhere from Florida to New Hampshire, training. And then we had some real world missions in Korea. And I'm not going to talk about those, but you can read about them if you want to read about how South Korea tried to find the North Korean submarines in 95, 96, and how the North Koreans, some of them, well, in 96, when the guys North Koreans got into South Korea, they rounded all of them up. But some I mean, right place, right time, I guess, is what it comes down to for me. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I've been so blessed that I've been able to do certain things.
What excites about your current job, right? Can you talk about that at all? What you do?
My current job? Well, right now, I mean, well, let's see. I switched from the Navy to the Army. I went to infantry school, became an officer, went to infantry officer basic course, which is essentially like a pre-ranger school, and ended up going to Africa. And well, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So the balloon went up, and I was supposed to go to Iraq. And so they took me through medical, and I told them, I said, well, I have multiple sclerosis. And they said, well, you're going home. So I was medically retired. That was one of the hardest things I ever did, was telling them the truth. But, I mean, you know, you learn when you go through OCS, I will not, lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. So I didn't want to be a liar, so I told him the truth. So I got medically retired. Well, luckily I'd been through infantry officer basic course, and a job came up in Africa as a contractor to train on the ACOTA program. ACOTA it's through the U.S. State Department. You can look it up. It says for African Contingency Operations and Training Assistance. And from February 2008 to November 2014, I was training African troops off and on from, let's see, Nigeria, Ghana, Uganda, Rwanda, Djibouti, all those places. And that was probably the best job. Did it pay? Yes, that paid. And it paid very well, I might add. But there again, that all came from what? From having my military experience. Had I not had my military experience, I would never have gotten that job. It was a great experience. I stopped doing that in 2014. Had a surgery, had a hernia. So it wasn't very good for my marriage, unfortunately, as well. And so I finished that. Then I found out that they were doing fetal stem cell therapy in Ukraine. And so I went over to Ukraine, paid about 10 grand, and got some fetal stem cells implanted. Wife and I ended up separating for about a year and a half, and I ended up back over there on the front lines. Well, I volunteered. I met a guy from Kenosha, Wisconsin, who knew some people, and they got me up to the front lines where the Ukrainians are fighting the Russians there in the Donbass region. And I found out some of the problems that they were having, and did a little ad hoc training with them. And that was the language barrier was the hardest part, but luckily there was a guy there that could translate for me. So I used a dry erase board and the translator and said, hey, don't put guys out at traffic checkpoints if you don't have patrols or counter snipers that can cover them. Because they were just putting guys out there at checkpoints to stop traffic, to check traffic, make sure there weren't any Russians roaming around. And that's a good idea, but they didn't have any backup. They didn't have any patrols or counter snipers, and Russians were just sniping these checkpoint guys off left and right. And I said, hey, if you don't have the manpower to back up your checkpoints, don't be putting them out there, because you're just putting out targets is what you're doing. And so that was a great learning experience for me. I mean, I had previously contracted in Kazakhstan. I trained the Kazakh Airborne Brigade. So that was my first run-in with training in Russian. I learned a little Russian, but not enough to train, and that's for sure. And that was back in 2010, and this was like 2015, and I'm in Ukraine working with Ukrainians. It was enjoyable, to say the least. But I've had my surgery, so my hernia is all better now. So I've decided to take it easy now. So now I'm an Arizona Ranger, and I teach history in high school when I can. So that's what I'm currently doing. So from all of that exciting stuff, bullet dodging and teaching, training soldiers from everywhere from Kazakhstan to Ukraine to Africa, to now quiet little Arizona Ranger, which is basically I'm a hobby cop. We back up other law enforcement agencies throughout the state of Arizona. We have 20 companies in the state of Arizona, and yeah, I mean I'm a sergeant, but the reason I'm a sergeant is because I'm a chaplain, and I'm a chaplain with the Peoria company of the Arizona Rangers, and I've got some great stories, obviously, that I can look back on, reflect back on. I'm getting to be 53 years old, so it's time to slow down, spend some time with the family. Got back with my wife, and got to see my daughter graduate high school, my youngest. So the older ones are my oldest is having grandbabies. She just had her second. So now I'm relaxing, teaching high school and doing the hobby cop stuff.
Wow. So you're actually teaching. That's great. You're teaching high school. That's great. I mean, obviously, I don't know that you could. So I asked everybody this question actually on the podcast, and it's really like based on your experience. What advice would you give somebody working at McDonald's who's trying to get into the field you're getting to, or who's trying to get into the job you have?
Right. And as a high school teacher, I mean, I hear that all the time because kids, they come up to me and they ask me questions and stuff, and I tell them, well, you know, when I did this, and they're like, you did that? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, how do you get to do that? And I tell them, I say, first thing you need to do, in my opinion, is to go to basic training, go to boot camp for one branch of the military. Find out what you want to do. I mean, I just had a young lady graduate from I helped her through her math class, and she graduated, thank goodness, and she wants to go to the Marine Corps. She took the ASVAB. She didn't do so good. She's going to retake it. And I got a Marine buddy of mine that Dan that I work out with at Luke Air Force Base gym, and he's going to help her out so she gets a higher score so she can get into what she wants to get into in the Marine Corps. That's what she wants to do. She wants to be a Marine. I'm like, that's great. So yeah, my recommendation is go in the military. Do your 4 years as an enlisted guy at least. I mean, I did how many years enlisted? I did 14 years enlisted. Yeah, and did the last 6 as an officer. So, you know, I mean, when I switched from the Navy to the Army, I went from E5 to E6. I went through what they call BNOC. They don't call it that anymore, but they used to call it BNOC, Basic Non-Commissioned Officer Course. And while I was in that, they said, hey, you got enough college credits, you could go to OCS. You want to be an officer? I said, yeah, sure, why not? So I went to OCS and became an officer, and then went to infantry officer, and I met some of the greatest guys. I mean, the first, probably the only free fall mission in Iraq was conducted by a guy I went through IOBC, Infantry Officer Basic Course with. And, I mean, that's great. The guy that owns or that runs Beyond SOF, which if you go in the military and you get some skills and you come out and you want to be a civilian contractor, he's the guy. His name's Steve Brignoli. He runs Beyond SOF. Guess what? He and I we're in the same class of Infantry Officer Basic Course. So, I mean, he's a great guy. I mean, he's done so much. I mean, I don't know, he's chairman of the board of all these different organizations now, and I knew him when he was a second lieutenant. So yeah, you make great contacts. You meet interesting, great people. There's a book called The Commandos by Douglas C. Waller, and he gets to go through. Doug Waller goes through with a class. With a BUDS class that's going, become SEALs, and the officer in that class is Tom Rancich. I knew Tom Rancich when he was an ensign in the Navy. He and I were on the same ship. We were stationed. I met his wife before he did, for crying out loud. I mean, I've met some really great people, and all through the military. So I would definitely say first thing you want to do is plan out your military future. Spend 3-4 years in the military. Check it out.
No, that's great advice, actually. That's great advice. Yeah. So the last question I'll ask you, right? I won't take much of your time. I know your time is busy. Rather, your time is important to you. So I wanted to know, like, how tell people how they can get in contact with you. Social media. You have a YouTube channel. You obviously have a Twitter. But if you could just talk about that.
Yeah, no, I don't have a YouTube channel because I've never really thought of myself as a very interesting. The kids that I teach school think I'm interesting, and I guess my wife probably thinks I'm interesting, but I never YouTube channel. I'm on LinkedIn, Scott Haddix. Facebook, same, Scott Haddix, and Twitter, Scott Haddix. But I don't tweet that often. I don't have a lot to tweet about. I mean, usually what I do is when I check my Twitter and I find stuff that I find interesting, which is usually stuff from Tim Kennedy, I retweet it because he's always on Twitter. But yeah, that's about it as far as getting a hold of me. Yeah, my email for the Arizona Rangers is shaddix, Haddix, at azrangers.gov.
Well, Scott, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Thanks a lot. I know a lot of people will get a lot of knowledge out of this. Is there anything else you want to say? Anything else you'd like to say?
Not that I can think of. I mean, like I said, I was just at ASU's downtown campus in Phoenix, and I was talking about it. I said all of my opportunities have come because I volunteered for stuff. So I would say, some of my best experiences have come from volunteering. And we used to joke that Navy stood for never again volunteer yourself. But man, I tell you, if I hadn't volunteered for all the things I volunteered for, I wouldn't have the experiences.